Hello and welcome to our Tips and Techniques videos. I'm Mark Biasotti and we are currently in our advanced modeling episodes. And over the next 30 minutes or so, we'll be exploring how you can increase your skills using some of SolidWorks' more advanced features so that you can be more productive and create higher quality models. So whether you're a seasoned SolidWorks user or a beginner, we think that you'll learn something new in this series. For your convenience, we've listed the topics in the YouTube description that we'll be covering in today's episode, along with a timestamp for each topic in the video. Feel free to skip ahead to any tip or point you want to learn more about. This series is being brought to you by Spanner Product Development, a product development company dedicated to creating positive impact in the world, merging innovation, sustainability, and responsibility to bring meaningful experiences to life for over hundreds of clients. If you want to learn more about what Spanner has to offer, stop by our website at spannerpd.com or email us at hello@spannerpd.com. Now let's get started with this episode of our advanced modeling episodes.
There's a tip I failed to mention over in episode 21 of PhotoView 360 that I want to bring up here in episode 22 for placing decals, and I almost exclusively use this when placing decals. So we need to place on the Beats headphones in this face the word studio, an icon of studio. So let's go over to Photoshop. I have a reference of what it looks like on my Beats headphone here, and I cannot find a high-res view of this, so we're going to have to recreate it. So I'll create the decal using this reference. I'll show you why that's important. So let's turn off background, and let's also do a Control T, and this is slightly askewed. I think what would help is to put some guides in here first. So let's do that. So I'm going to put guides in that represent the boundary of the face I'm putting the decal on. And then let me just make a quick adjustment to my photo to get it a little straighter. Okay. Now with those guides, we can go ahead and crop that area. So I'm cropping the image to that area. And now with that piece of artwork that I already created for Studio, I'll go into episode 21 and find that. And then I'm going to place it into this reference. Try to get the size and placement, what it would be in real life. So turn off my snapping, and I think that looks good. So I can either delete this layer or hide it, and then go and I'm going to re-save my PNG for my decal. So dropping down to PNG. In episode 22, I'll call this Studio Placed. Okay, now going back over to SolidWorks, I want to place that decal on this face. To do that quickly though and accurately, I think I'll do a 3-point plane just as a reference. And with that 3-point plane selected, I'll go right to normal to that. So now I know I'm looking exactly normal onto that face at its center. And with that, I can now place my decal. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my filter, select this face, edit decal, and then load that image I just created. And so I'll go to browse to that folder under episode 22, pick the decal, and now it places it on that face And if we go to mapping and we turn on projection, but we also say current view because this is the current view that we want it to be exactly normal to. Here's the tip that makes it very easy. If you had created that label or decal with the boundaries of the image itself exactly where the blue lines are, you can then click on fit to width and fit to height, and it automatically fits it exactly the way it would be without any alteration or experimentation in scale or placement. So that is a very big time saver. Let's make sure that we use the decal image alpha mask, and we have our label or our decal placed very quickly and accurately. So now that we have all the materials assigned to our Beats headphones, we can go back and take just another pass at the lighting setup before we get to the camera, or you can do it after you've set up the camera. One thing I wanted to show you though is I've already showed how by going into the scene itself and rotating the scene under the Advanced tab here, you can get dramatic lighting effects on the object because the HDR environment has key points of light in it that you're now rotating around the object. So you can see how dramatic the effect is here when I go from about 72 degrees to about 250 degrees. Furthermore, what you have to realize though here is that we're just rotating the HDR environment around one axis. If you want more variation than that, then if you wanted to rotate it around the Y or the Z axis, what you can do is actually change the orientation of the floor, which then thereby changes the orientation of the model to the scene. So in this case, I've got bottom view. If I want to go and change it to XY, of course my model changes in the view, but if we put it back to generally what we had for the rendered view, you can see now the lighting is quite different. And now that we rotate the lighting, it rotates on a different axis. So here, if we want lighting to come from above, we can do that and use that little trick of changing the floor to get that different axis of environmental rotation. Likewise, if I go to YZ and move my model back to something like this, that's similar to where we know we're going to render the model and then continue to experiment with my lighting, I can do that. Now, I can afford to do that because in this particular scene, I'm not rendering against a transparent background. I'm going to put it on a tabletop. So the shadowing is not that important because I don't really have a floor. My scene is completely filled with 3D model. And you can see here that I have it sitting on the table and the shadow of the headphone itself is casting itself on the tabletop. So I have that flexibility to change the floor without really changing the scene and thereby really tune my lighting to what I want it to be. So now that we've applied our appearances, we've taken another pass at lighting and our decals are on there, it's time to move on to setting up our camera view. In this particular model that you can download, I have a couple camera views. The camera 2 view is what I'm using to render. You can see it's a square format. Camera 1 is a different angle. You can set up as many cameras you want. They are superior over just doing a perspective view because there's many more controls that are available to you for setting the depth of field, the angle of view, the focal point, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think what I'll do is I'll just start a new camera view that mimics this camera 2 view and just we'll just walk through that a bit and show you how that's done. So I know that in my final rendering, I'm going to actually show a background as a table. The reason I'm doing that is because, namely, I want to get, let's go back to 3/4 view here. I wanted to get some of this reddish wood bouncing back into the object itself, and I couldn't do that if it wasn't here. So physically, I have light bouncing from the HDR environment, from the table, up into these faces on the model. So that's one of the primary reasons I want that in there. But now I want to just kind of set up what I want it to be framed, how I want it to be framed in my final view. So I'm going to go over to my appearance manager here, and then under camera, I'll just say add camera. And with that, SolidWorks gives you a view through the camera, but then a third-person view that you can use over here on the left to actually manipulate your camera as you're looking at what you're seeing through the camera on the right. So there's a number of things that are available for you to do. You can, if you really want to think about physical photography, then you can set up the camera with its particular lens setting, so 35mm wide angle, 50mm standard. 50mm standard is what most cameras do at a studio level. If you're getting up close, you're definitely going to want to use like 35mm lens, and then you can vary it anywhere in between. So you can do that using the widgets here. So I'm going to pull in on this, and you can see even pulling in on this, it's focused on the object itself. You can actually set some geometry on the model itself to always have the camera track or have the target point set on that point. So if I set it right there, I can pull in and out and rotate around, and it will never lose the object out of the field of view. That could be a good thing in a lot of situations and could be a bad thing in other situations. So, you know, it's up to you and what you want to really accomplish here. I'm not going to use it for right now. I'm going to basically set up my view just visually using my triads on the camera, and then get it good enough. And then once I have that, I'll just start manipulating it from the actual view. The other thing that you might want to consider while you're here is the kind of what I call the golden rule of photography, and that is it makes for a more interesting shot if you don't center your object in the middle of your view, and that's one of the reasons that I'm not using target by view. But if you actually offset it and maybe change the angle a bit, it gives for a more interesting view. That's probably most easily done after you kind of set up the main camera like I'm doing right now. And then we have our camera 3. And if you unlock the view itself, what's going on here? Oh, we're not on actually camera 3, so let's do that. And then unlock the camera. And now when it's unlocked, you're now changing the camera looking through the camera. And what I had mentioned before is that I don't usually want to center my objects. I usually put them off to one side, and then holding down my Alt key, I change the angle a bit to give it a little more interest. At this point, I'm really focused on wanting to see some of the details of the headphone. That is the Beats logo here, looking a little bit more inside of the ear muff here. And if it helps you, it's probably important then to just turn on your PhotoView preview window. It will show a lot more than what I'm showing here. in my camera view and real view. So now I'm getting pretty close to where I want it to be. You can see that my wood is now showing here off the edge. I'm not too concerned about that because I'm going to probably crop this view once I've done my final rendering. But if that is a concern, then you can actually just slide this over by just taking and not sure if I have it locked or not, or what I'm doing here, but it's its own part. So if I go here and move it over, oh, of course, we're talking about a multi-body model. This is an assembly. Pardon me. So what I'm going to do is actually just use my shortcut key here to use a move copy body on it. So we can go to insert let's see, face tools, insert face, move. Actually, we want to move copy body. So we're going to insert features, move copy, and then select this, and now just kind of slide it over, or try to do that. That could be pretty hard to do given that we're in a camera view. So it might make sense to split this view and do it from a third, kind of like a different view to see what we're doing. So we're going to make this view our camera view, camera 3. Okay. And now we're really getting lost here. So we got something like this. And let's just, let's lock our camera view for the moment. And now over here, insert feature, move copy. So we're just going to slide this over enough to where it fills the frame. And that's probably good. So now I have a little bit bleeding off here. I can also go to the actual object and just increase its size. You can see that I've extruded on midplane, and I can just start increasing its size to do that too. Okay. Let's go ahead and turn off multiple planes, plane views, and then go back to our camera 3, and there we go. So let's go back in and edit the camera 3 view that we're going to use for our rendering. And let's also, in addition to setting up the perspective, the angle, the lens angle and its placement, let's turn on depth of field. So depth of field basically says that for physical photography, it's in a 50 to 35 millimeter lens situation like this, it's rather hard to keep the whole scene in focus physically. So this is kind of a trick to trick the eye into seeing this as a physical photograph. So we're going to actually put in some depth of field as a physical camera would. And so as we bring out our third person view here, we have some little indicators to show our depth of field here over on the right. So the first thing you can do is just set the initial depth of field by picking a point on the model where you want it to be in focus. And I think right about there at that forward headband is where we want it. And then from that point, you can start to adjust the focal depth of it. So I'm going to just bring it down to something like that. Now, in SolidWorks, these plane indicators don't really indicate in most situations where something is in focus and out of focus. That's what I would immediately draw as a conclusion when seeing these widgets, that this is completely in focus and then everything goes out of focus after in the foreground from this plane and in the rear from this plane. But that's not necessarily the case. It takes some experimentation, and what I find usually is that you really have to get in pretty tight with these planes, these plane widgets, to see some depth of field. If we turn on our preview window again, you'll see what I'm talking about. And you really can only see it when you have the PhotoView preview window on. It doesn't really show up in real view. So here we have it. You can see if I enlarge the preview window, you can see the blurriness that's occurring on the back of the edge of the headband. So that's everything going out of focus beyond this point. And then for the foreground, everything is pretty much in focus because you can see that there's not much detail beyond this foreground plane. So that's probably a pretty good setting. I think I probably have forced it a little bit, so I'm going to pull back a bit on that and get something that's probably more like that. Okay, so here we have the percentage of distance along the edge or line, and then down here we have the focal plane. So I think that is probably pretty good. That's what I want. And we can pan in a bit more for what we have here. So let's go in a little closer. Now our perspective is getting a bit forced, right? So we want to maybe pull that to something like 45. And then we can just play with the angle a bit more once we get out of the camera. But our focal length will stay put because we have focused on a point in the model. So that is how you set the depth of field. So now that we have our camera established, we can move on to rendering. We can bring up our PhotoView preview window, and we can just start checking over the model to make sure that we've got everything set the way that we want it to be. You know what I did there? I did an integrated preview. I don't want that. That's the ability to actually make your entire SolidWorks viewport the PhotoView window, and I wouldn't recommend that. It's probably better to actually just use the preview window because you can make it smaller, it'll be more interactive. Another thing I did is I didn't lock my camera here, so I'm going to come back. Let's come back to our camera and try to get it back to where we were as far as our view. And then let's make sure that we lock it. So there we go. Okay, now we're going to go and bring up a preview window. And as you know, we can scrub areas to make them pre-render faster than the rest of the scene. And usually at this point, everything is looking good. It's the right colors. I have the right bounce light coming from the table. I've set it up to where I'm pretty satisfied. If you are going and looking at the model, just checking things, it's probably best not to do it in the camera view because you don't want to alter that. And I've just locked this one. by doing that. At least I thought I did. So you probably want to use something just like a 3/4 view with your PhotoView preview window, because then you can just freely move it around anywhere, zoom in, check details. Like, I want to take a look at this Beats logo, make sure I have it right. Does my power button look right? So you just scrub through that, take a look at that, take a look at that. It's looking good. I think I have the right specularity on my light metallic color, and I'm getting some good bounce light on my actual headphone from the table itself. So I'm pretty satisfied with what I have. So I'm just going to go back to my rendered camera view. I don't know why it does that. It's a little annoying. Camera is supposed to be locked. So we're ready to render. So a few of the things you can do under the PhotoView options is you can tweak a bit on other aspects, like, say for instance, the lightness or darkness of the scene itself, or the number of reflections or bounces. The quality, I rarely do maximum, but I'm usually on best when it comes to the final render quality. The preview is always good for me. I bring it down low because I want the interactiveness of it. Other controls are bloom. Now bloom is when you want highlights that are blowing out. That is light that's reflected back into the camera that just becomes kind of blurry and white. You can set the bloom extend, which is default at 9. I usually bring it up to about 12, and I bring the set point down to about 85 to just, if I really want to get some exaggeration on that. And that might happen, and you don't actually get to see it until you get to the post-rendered end of your rendering, and you might see some highlighting of bloom coming off of these edges here. The gamma is your particular monitor has a certain light output, and you want to make sure that you set this for SolidWorks and PhotoView even before you start rendering, because it does affect the final rendering. But you can change that in post, which I'll show you. Number of reflections, number of refractions. This just, I mean, if you have a lot of glass in your object and it's going to be transparent through many layers, you might want to start playing with these numbers to make sure that it's going to stay transparent through all those layers, because if it's set to a low value, you'll see that your glass will turn black at some point when you're trying to see through it. So we're good to go with that. The scene itself you can vary its intensity and brightness and reflection. If we edit the scene, you have some additional controls under basic, I guess. I thought they were under, I might be mistaken. Oh yeah, it's under the PhotoView 360 lighting. So right now this is set at 1 for both the background brightness and the render brightness. So background brightness would be the actual back plate of the scene. In this case, we don't really have a back plate being shown because we're seeing the rendered tabletop. The render brightness, though, is just making the whole scene more intense. For instance, if I turn this up to 2, you can see that it's just starting to blow out. So I wouldn't recommend really drastic changes here. Maybe bringing it up to 1.1 or 1.2 would be advantageous. But going too far on this, you'll start to lose some realism. doing, starting to set these controls. So with this, then we can go ahead and do a final rendering. So the final rendering right now, if we look under our options, the rendering is set for HD 1920 by 1080, and usually I set it at that. You can also set it to the SolidWorks view or do something more custom. Right now, HD is fine because I'm going to probably, crop it in post anyway. So there are some neat little controls in here, like you can actually add the ambient inclusion to the scene. I wouldn't recommend it. I think it's a trick and it takes away from realism. But it can be nice, and if you're doing some kinds of some renderings for manuals and graphics. So anyway, everything looks good here, so we can just kick off a rendering. So I'm going to kick off a rendering. And now on this machine, this is an AMD Ryzen 3700, has 16 virtual cores. You'll know that by the time it gets to after the fourth pass and starts to render, you'll see the little boxes appear. So as it's starting to render now, you see 16 boxes going through the scene and rendering each portion of the scene. And if you're not satisfied with what you see right up front here, you can cancel it, of course, by hitting the abort button and then changing some of your parameters and re-rendering. Over here on the right, it gives you some statistics as it's being rendered, showing how much time's elapsed, how much time is estimated to remain, gives you the frame settings, what are some of the settings you set for quality, and a lot of other information that really take a rocket scientist to figure out, at least for me. So we'll just let this render, and you can watch it render. It's doing a pretty good job. There's not many expensive materials in here, and when I mean expensive, meaning long time to render. So lots of glass materials and materials with lots of refractions are going to take a lot longer to render. These materials are rather inexpensive, so it's going to go pretty quickly. And you can see the texture starting to show up on the leather, which is nice. You can see that the specularity of the gunmetal light is just about what I want it to be. And you can see how the light is now reflecting from the tabletop. The warm wood color is reflecting up into the headphone itself. And then its final pass, it's going to put anti-aliasing into it to smooth out any of the jaggies. And that's your rendering. So now we're going to move on to what I call post-production. Now that you have your rendering, and we can take a look at it at full resolution, we want to go and use some post-editing tools to further improve that rendering. So the way that you save this rendering will make some dramatic differences. If I was just going to, say, PowerPoint, I would just save it as a regular PNG and just drop it in to whatever presentation I have. And if we just did this as Untitled, I'm just going to put it in here, Untitled image, and then go over to the PowerPoint for this particular webcast. Actually, it's the one for the last. If I bring this, I have to close this window. So let me turn off my preview window and then go over to PowerPoint and bring up a new one. And so the advantage of that is if I just insert that last photo here as a PNG that I saved in my temp folder here, I can just drop it right in. Now, if the table was not in there, everything behind this would appear transparent. And if we were to re-render it without the table, we get the shadows, but we get transparency behind the whole object. But because the table is really important to me, and as far as the scene and the realism, I've included it. And so what I would probably do in the picture effects is I'd just add little soft edges just to make it a little more palatable for my presentation, something like that. So that's really not what I wanted to talk about here. It was more the post-processing. So if we go back to our SolidWorks and we go and recall last rendered image, which just brings up the render window in your current renderers. First has to show the preview. Here's a rendering down here. So I saved as a PNG, but you might want to also consider saving it as a HDR. If you have Photoshop, then you get a lot more versatility with a HDR, and I'll show you why. So we're going to save this as an HDR, and we'll just save it again to that temp directory, and we'll call it Beats Studio 1. And then as we go over to Photoshop, and we drop these decaled images and open up that image we just saved under our C drive. So we're in C temp. Here's the HDR image. So usually I find that when it comes into Photoshop, it comes in with the wrong exposure, but not to worry. This is the HDR image, so you have pretty much full control over the exposure, the offset, and the gamma. So usually if I get something like this, I'll just start by leaving the exposure the way it is and then going with offset to get it back to where I think it's the right exposure. And maybe bring that up a bit, correct the gamma, and we can get something back to where we want it. Now, in this particular shot, you can see that it's getting quite bright on the table, left and right. And I think for the sake of what I did for rendering, I did a pretty good job with my exposure. So I don't need to do this correction. There are cases though where if you've rendered something, and let me just show details here. So I have an underexposed image that I did in PhotoView, and this is where HDR really pays off, because now I can correct this image and I don't have to throw it away and re-render it. But by going to exposure, I can then make my adjustments without blowing out any part of the actual image. So I'm going to bring up the exposure a bit, and you can see that it comes up pretty well. And then just do a bit of offset, and I can save that image. So that's a really good thing. You can see in this particular image, I probably rendered it at a lower quality, so there's quite a bit of grain in there. If I really didn't want to re-render it, I could probably put a filter in for noise and reduce noise. You can't do that in HDR. I have to convert it first. So let me bring it back down to something like 8 bits and use the exposure and gamma setting there. And then I can go into noise, reduce noise, and get quite a bit of noise reduction there. So if I do that, then it doesn't reduce it all the way, but I get a good amount of it. So anyway, what I'm really going to use is just the PNG image that I saved out. So if we use this image, which is rather well exposed, I'm just going to do a few minor adjustments. First, I want to get rid of this corner over here, so I'm going to crop this image. I'm going to hold down my shift key. I'm sorry, not hold down my shift key, but select the whole thing, then hold down shift, and then reduce the area to eliminate that triangle over there. And then also what I was mentioning about composition, I like to just not have anything centered, but just kind of offset, just for interest, like so. You can also, if you want, you can kind of put a tilt into it, like so. Of course, you want to do that after you crop it. But with that composition, then I can go in and make some minor adjustments to levels. I can just clip the low and high end of the dynamic range here, and then use my middle slider to try to get my best exposure. And you can see how nicely the reddish of the table is reflecting up into the headphones itself. And with that, I think the color is a little strong, so I'm going to make an adjustment to my saturation to bring that down a bit, just to make it a little more realistic. Yeah. So another option you might want to consider is to save your PhotoView in PNG 16-bit. That gives you a little bit more leeway and more control. So like HDR, if I were to go into exposure, now I can change exposure and offset without things blowing out, and do quite a bit there to alter it. So I think eventually, though, you'll probably want to drop down, when you're publishing as a JPEG or a PNG, you want to drop down to an 8-bit image. So that's a good way to save. It's probably PNG 16 for post-processing. Another technique that you can use if you want absolute realism with your photo renders, and you want to do it in the context of an existing real environment, is to use a mirror ball and create your own HDR image from a SLR camera. So this is a mirror ball as you can see here. They're basically garden balls. You can buy them very inexpensively, and I would recommend something on the 10 to 12 inch diameter range. And the idea here is to the environment where you're going to be doing your digital rendering, you take a HDR image of its surrounding image using an SLR camera in RAW or EXR mode, and then bracket it a few exposures up and down. You can use Photoshop to actually bring in HDRs. The more modern versions of Photoshop will accept HDR and create your HDR image. They'll even be able to take and create a cube map or spherical map of that. In this example here, this was from a short video that we did at SolidWorks a number of years ago called Dream to Design. And the storyboard was that a college student had a roommate who was had a disability, and he wanted to give him the top bunk bed. So we shot a scene at one of the local colleges of this, and the final shot looks like this in the video. So the mechanism that Sam on the right designed for his friend, that is all digital and animated, but it was realistically lighted using this mirror ball and the HDR that was derived from the mirror ball, and then used in post-production to actually render and animate this composite of the digital mechanism that's placed into the scene. So again, if you really want absolute realism, and you're doing it in the context of a existing environment with your digital asset, create your own spherical HDR using a mirror ball. And there's plenty more out there on the web on how to do that. You can just search Google HDR mirror ball, and I'll tell you all how to do it. Photoshop, again, has, in the more modern versions, a lot of tools for creating HDR images from your own camera images, but also from digital assets on the web and then converting them into cube and spherical map. If your goal is to create an animation using PhotoView versus a still image, then you can use, you can create a motion study and do a turntable animation either by moving the camera around, as I have in this file, or rotate the object in the tabletop around the axis and keep the camera still. So I just have this simple kind of turntable animation here, putting the camera in a 360 spin around the object. And when you're happy with that, then you can go and render an animation. So you pull down from the SolidWorks screen to PhotoView 360, set your resolution to what you want, and also make sure that your time range is the time range of the animation. Here it's 10 seconds. I'm going to make it a 15 frame per second animation. And then, really important here, I would never ever render an AVI or a movie. I rather would render a still image sequence like a PNG. And so I have a folder here where I've already created this PNG sequence. The reason I say that is that when you render in SolidWorks, there could be 1 or 2 frames that drop or have a problem with them. And if that's the case, you have to re-render the entire video if it's AVI, for instance. With PNG sequence, if 1 or 2 frames is out of whack or there's some problem with that, you can just re-render part of your animation and save most of it. So it really makes sense if you can afford to, and if you have the right tools, meaning some kind of video editor where you can take a PNG sequence to render using a sequence like I've done here. Excuse me. So anyway, I've already rendered this sequence, so I'm not going to do that, but if I were, it'd just be a save and then a render. So let me kill this. And now with that sequence, you can go to, still didn't kill it, go to a product like After Effects. So I view After Effects as the Photoshop of animation, or Photoshop on steroids. So most anything you can do in Photoshop with a still image, you can do with After Effects with an animation. And so here I have my PNG sequence that's been brought into After Effects. And if I just scrub the timeline, you can see the 360 photorealistic animation spinning around the Beats headphone. I even did some things to this, just like you saw me do to Photoshop, where I'm using some filters to remove grain, to change the levels, and to change the saturation. And that's on the entire sequence. If you turn them off, you can kind of see the subtle differences between them. There's the grain on and off. So just a fantastic tool. If you're doing animations on a regular basis, really recommend After Effects. A little deep to learn. I've known it for many years, so that helps. But very versatile tool used in the post-processing broadcasting world. So After Effects, great tool for that. And then once I've got things set up and I can even crop and do other effects, then I save out an animation from here by adding it to the render queue, and then rendering it. I promised you I'd talk a little bit about custom HDR. I don't have a lot of time left, but I'll try to fit in something that might be useful to you for creating your own custom HDR. So here we have the headphones lying down, and I have a new camera view for those. You can see right here. So there is a number of free sites on the web where you can download free HDRs. One that I've used over the years that I find quite useful is HDR Labs. And with HDR Labs, they have a category called Smart IBL. And what Smart IBL is a collection of images, both HDR and backplates, all together in one zip file. So this Ditch River is one I'll just use as an example for our headphones. So we'll have the headphones lying in the middle of a ditch river. And if we take a look at that unzipped folder, and I'll go over to that and look at it, we have when you unzip that, you have a number of files. So you have the most important high-res HDRI file, and you can know that by the size that it shows here. It's over 6 meg. And then you have a low-res version. So the high-res version, if you look at it, looks like this. So the low-res version, though, looks like this. And that is probably enough for what you need for the environment to light the scene. So here you have, this is a HDR image. So this really bright key light here is what's lighting most of the scene. And then as it gradates off into colors in different parts of the image that are blurred, it's also contributing light from this whole scene. But this is a valid HDR image for your environment. It's not good enough for the backplate because it doesn't have enough resolution. This other image is good for the backplate, but it's a spherical wrap. So you also get with that set a number of different backplates. So if you look here, those are the two that we just highlighted. Then you get more cropped, high-resolution backplates that you can use along with your environment. So just keep that in mind in the next few minutes as we go back to SolidWorks and we take this 3-point. Let's just drag in the courtyard scene so you can see how this is working. So again, I have with my camera here, if we go back to our 3/4 view, we have this plane that I've created down here at an angle that touches off on the ear muffs and the back edge of the bracket goes between them. So that looks a little high. So what we want to do is edit that scene and bring down the shadow so that it's sitting a little closer. Okay. So with this edited now, let's make a new HDR scene using new images. So I'm going to go over to the Ditch River that I saved the images, and I'm going to use the lower res HDR. Let's just use the higher res for right now and load that in. So you can see it immediately changes, and for the background we're going to use one of the backplate images. So going back to that folder for Ditch River, we're going to just probably use this one right here, I think, because of its size, and maybe this one. Okay. So let's go ahead and adjust our floor shadow. That changed a little bit when we changed our scene. Okay. Bring it in here. And now we've got the basis for everything that we need. So we're using a backplate image here for background. We're using the low-res HDR to light. And then I can go into advanced, and then I can rotate the scene to get the sunlight overhead. So at this point, you probably want to bring up your preview window. And I think for this scene, we're actually going to need to add some sunlight to it to be more convincing. So let's go ahead and do that. So with this, we're going to go and add sunlight. And we're going to bring it around to the other side, something like that. And I think that's pretty good. We can increase the sun diameter if you want the shadow to be a bit blurrier. The ground is a lighter color, so we're going to change that to be something that's similar to what we see in our scene. Something like that. That'll help with a lot of the bounce light. So we're getting there. And haze is if there's not, if there's not direct sunlight, but some haze or clouds. It looks like a pretty clear day, so we're going to keep that the way it is. We'll go back over to the courtyard scene that we haven't yet customized, edited, and saved as our scene. In advanced, we can do that. We can say save scene. We can go to that folder where we have Ditch River, and we can save it as this Ditch River P2S scene. So now we have that kind of recorded. We can do a bit more alteration on this to get it a little closer to what we need it to be. Let's just let that save. I think the last thing that we can do here to be a little bit more convincing is to move our scene around so that we get a nice bright spot over the top of the headphones. Let's go back and edit the sunlight. And we can edit the direction of the sun right now by just picking an alternate plane, something like the right plane, or we can experiment with the front plane. And then change the time of day to something like that. Okay, so the last thing we need to do is I can see in this scene that the HDR that we're using is not really reflecting enough of the background. So we're going to go back in here under Advanced, Photo Lighting, and then bump up the scene reflectivity. That's better. We could probably make the scene brightness a little higher too. And then work on the environmental rotation. We want our highlight to be right over the top of this band here. So I think that looks pretty good. So the last thing we're going to do is that in post-processing, I don't want this background. I'm basically using it right now for reference. So I'm going to say for my background, I'm going to just say none. And then we're going to go ahead and render this. Take a look at the sunlight again. Yeah, it looks okay. And so now with that, we're going to render this as a PNG or a 16-bit PNG. And I'll just cut this part of the video so that you don't have to be labored through the rendering process, and come back and show you what I have in Photoshop. Okay, so we're done with our rendering. Let's go over to Photoshop and let's load in the rendered image and the backplate. So I had done that as a PNG 16-bit. So here we have it, and we put some bloom in there too, so it really became overexposed on that band. And then on another layer behind it, I'm going to put it in that backplate. And place it in here. And there we have our high resolution backplate. Now, this is a very wide angle close-up view, so that would mean that the field of view would be very tight and all of this would be blurred. So I'm just going to cheat a little bit and make a selection on this backplate by just fence selecting about this much of it, and then doing a selection refine with a really large feather. And with that selection, now I can put in some Gaussian blur. And there we have our backplate. I'm going to have to crop that a bit because you can see it's falling off a little bit on the edges there. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Something like that is fine. Okay. So now we have two different layers. We have the backplate and we have our headphone. And at this point we have a lot of freedom to go ahead and alter the exposure of the image for both of these. We need to rasterize them because I placed them. Let me do that. So with this one, we can go ahead and work on the exposure of the backplate. So I want to get something real contrasty and real bright. But I want to see enough of the grain of the pavement here in the front. But I want this to be really dark, so there's a real wide dynamic range of exposure. And now with that, I can look forward, or I can work on my foreground image, which is my headphones. You can see because it's been dropped out, there's a slight halo around it. So I'm going to select that and then go to selection, contract by, let's say, 3 millimeters, and then feather that by 2 millimeters, and then inverse it, and then cut. So what that has done is just gotten rid of that halo that's going around my headphone here. With that selected now, I can start working on its exposure. If I can pick correctly. And first thing I might want to do is just check the levels on it. The levels are pretty good. I can do a little bit of adjustment there first, and then I can go into exposure and start to work on the offset and the gamma. And exposure. So it's really hot up in this area because we're in direct sunlight. One thing I see though is that this shadow is starting to get a little too light. So with that selected, I'll just use my magic wand and I'll try to make a good selection of that shadow. Probably bump that up to about 25. And I've over selected. And let me just finish up my selection here. Need to bring that back down to about 15. Nope. Okay. Now that I think I have all of my shadow here, the color is not matching the floor or the ground. So I'm going to take that and just do a color balance on it by just bringing a little more yellow into it. Probably easier if actually just to do saturation with colorize. So we can bring it into a color that's close to that floor color. Something like that. And then we can hide the selection itself. And then we can actually just work on the exposure. But before I'm going to do that, I'm going to just blur the edge a bit. So I'm going to feather it by 1. Turn off my extra. And then go and just work on make it a little less bright. Just bring that down a bit. So it looks more like a shadow. That's good. And then remember it's still selected, so we can burn this area where it's actually sitting a little closer to the headband. Do that right here. So, you can endlessly tweak on this, but those are some of the techniques to get this looking like it's in an outdoor environment, which is one of the hardest things to do, is to make objects like this in full sunlight look realistic. I could do a lot better on this with more time, but these are some of the basics for using a custom HDR, this ditch river. So remember, HDR Labs and ISBL downloads are really good content for making your own custom HDR. So I think that's we're going way over now. We're almost an hour, so I'm going to conclude this episode of PhotoView, and hopefully you've learned something on how to use PhotoView. There's a lot more I could talk about. Maybe in a future episode I could fill in on some of the more finer points, but hopefully this will get you a lot further in making photorealistic images.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. We hope what you've learned has been informative and can help you to better use some of SolidWorks' advanced features. You'll see in the YouTube description a link to example models used in today's video. Feel free to download it, and you can explore these techniques at your own leisure. Also, we'd love to hear from you, so consider emailing me at the address you see here on the screen. If you need help on your design project or just want to know more about us, stop by our website at spannerpd.com or email us at hello@spannerpd.com. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode.